Strength, as it is presented today, is loud. It argues, performs, and demands to be seen. Modern culture equates power with constant expression, visible dominance, and unfiltered opinion. The man who speaks the most is often assumed to be the most confident. But this assumption deserves examination. What if true strength is quieter than that? Few men realize the loudest voice in the room often signals insecurity rather than authority. When someone must constantly assert themselves, it suggests an internal instability seeking validation. Noise becomes compensation. Volume becomes armor. Machiavelli understood something modern culture has forgotten. Power belongs to those who control perception, and perception begins with self-control. The man who governs his impulses governs how others see him. The one who reacts to every provocation reveals more than he intends. Silence, in this sense, is not weakness. It is calculated restraint. It is the refusal to surrender composure for momentary validation. It signals that your value does not depend on constant display. Strength is not performance. It is control. And the difference between the two determines whether a man commands respect or merely attention. Modern men pride themselves on being analytical. We are told that intelligence means constant evaluation, endless consideration, and anticipating every possible outcome. On the surface, this appears responsible. But there is a threshold beyond which thinking ceases to strengthen and begins to weaken. Excessive thinking fragments action. It breeds indecision. The mind replays conversations long after they have ended, rehearses confrontations that may never happen, and imagines failures before a single step is taken. Anxiety loops form. Paralysis follows. Instinct, once sharp and immediate, becomes buried beneath internal noise. This is not stupidity. It is cognitive overload. In an environment saturated with information, opinions, and digital stimulation, the brain is rarely allowed to settle. Dopamine-driven distractions train attention toward novelty rather than resolution. Each scroll conditions the mind to seek another input instead of concluding a thought. Over time, rumination replaces clarity. There is a crucial distinction between deliberate thought and compulsive rumination. Deliberate thought has direction. It seeks a conclusion. It gathers evidence and then decides. Rumination circles endlessly without commitment. One sharpens judgment. The other corrodes confidence. Machiavelli understood that decisive action requires mental discipline. Leaders cannot afford infinite internal debate. Power demands clarity. And clarity does not come from thinking more, it comes from thinking precisely. Strength is not the accumulation of thoughts. It is the ability to cut through them. The man who can end his internal argument and move forward demonstrates control. The one who cannot remains trapped in possibility. Speech is one of the most revealing behaviors a man possesses. In social psychology, value is often governed by scarcity. What is rare is respected. What is abundant is discounted. Words operate under the same principle. When someone speaks constantly, their voice loses weight. When someone speaks selectively, attention sharpens. Measured speech signals authority. It suggests internal calibration rather than impulsive reaction. Emotional control, especially in moments of tension, is interpreted as dominance because it demonstrates stability. The man who does not rush to defend himself appears secure. The man who must respond immediately appears provoked. Oversharing weakens leverage. When you disclose every intention, frustration, or strategy, you remove ambiguity. And ambiguity, when used wisely, is influence. It forces others to calculate. It leaves space for perception to work in your favor. Transparency has its place, but uncontrolled transparency erodes depth. Consider the contrast. The reactive speaker fills silence out of discomfort. He explains excessively. He justifies decisions prematurely. The observant strategist listens longer than expected. He gathers information before revealing position. When he speaks, his words are deliberate, concise, and difficult to misinterpret. Machiavelli noted that men often betray themselves through careless speech. Impulse reveals insecurity. Anger reveals weakness. Boasting reveals doubt. The disciplined man understands that silence can conceal strength and preserve advantage. Speaking less is not about withdrawal. It is about selection. When words become intentional rather than automatic, presence changes. The room adjusts. Attention concentrates. Silence becomes strategic. Attention has become the most valuable currency of the modern age. Every platform competes for it. Every notification is engineered to fracture it. What was once a stable mental resource is now under constant assault. The result is not merely distraction, but fragmentation of the self. Fragmented attention weakens depth. When the mind is repeatedly pulled away from a task, it struggles to return with the same intensity. Social media dopamine loops condition the brain to crave novelty over completion. Each swipe offers anticipation without effort. Over time, the capacity for deep, sustained work diminishes. Reading becomes harder. Thinking becomes scattered. Projects remain unfinished. Attention spans shorten not because men are incapable, but because they are conditioned toward interruption. The distracted man moves from stimulus to stimulus, constantly reacting, rarely directing. The focused man cultivates the ability to remain with one objective long enough to master it. The difference compounds. Focus is economic leverage. In a world saturated with noise, the man who can concentrate produces rare output. Rare output commands value. It is psychological leverage because it strengthens control over impulse. It is status leverage because those who build meaningful work gain influence without theatrics. Few men today can sit in uninterrupted concentration for a single hour. That rarity alone creates advantage. When a skill becomes uncommon, it becomes powerful. To control attention is to control trajectory. The man who directs his focus decides where his energy goes. The one who cannot is guided by whatever demands him next. In an environment engineered for distraction, sustained focus is not ordinary discipline. It is modern power. Noise appears harmless at first. It feels like participation, expression, engagement. But over time, it carries a cost that few men calculate. At the individual level, constant reaction breeds emotional volatility. When every irritation is voiced and every opinion expressed, impulse overrides composure. The nervous system remains in a low-grade state of activation. This leads to social miscalculation. Speaking too soon, revealing too much, escalating conflicts unnecessarily. What feels like honesty can quietly erode credibility. Energy depletion follows. Every argument entered, every comment made, every unnecessary explanation drains cognitive resources. Attention, once sharp, becomes scattered. By the end of the day, there is little strength left for what actually matters. Reputation suffers in subtle ways. The man who reacts to everything becomes predictable. His triggers are visible. His boundaries are tested more easily. Authority weakens when restraint disappears. At the identity level, something deeper is lost. Mystery. Mystery commands respect. When others cannot easily decipher you, they approach with caution. Oversharing dissolves depth. The more you reveal impulsively, the less gravity you carry. On a broader scale, a culture that prioritizes expression over reflection becomes chaotic. Volume replaces wisdom. Reaction replaces strategy. If you constantly react, you can never strategize. Strategy requires distance from impulse. Without that distance, strength collapses into performance. Pause for a moment and consider your own patterns. How often do you speak simply to avoid silence? How often do you explain yourself when no explanation was required? In conversation, do you respond to dominate the space or to understand it? And internally, how often do you continue thinking long after a decision could have been made? How many hours have been lost to mental rehearsals that never translated into action? When was the last time you consciously chose restraint over reaction, silence over validation, focus over distraction? Few men are willing to examine their impulsiveness honestly. It is easy. Philosophy without practice changes nothing. If strength is precision, then it must be trained deliberately. The discipline of less begins with thinking. Create decision windows. Instead of allowing thoughts to spiral indefinitely, assign time to evaluate and conclude. When the window closes, you decide. Structured reflection sharpens clarity because it limits excess. Outside of that time, refuse to replay the same internal argument. Mental loops lose power when they are not entertained. In speech, implement the pause. Before responding, allow a breath of silence. That moment interrupts impulse. Eliminate unnecessary explanation. Not every action requires justification. Choose precision over volume. Speak to move the conversation forward, not to fill space. With focus, establish digital restriction periods. The first hour of the day and the last hour before sleep should belong to you, not to algorithms. Build deep work blocks where interruption is removed by design. Silence notifications. Control your environment so that attention becomes deliberate rather than reactive. This is not about changing your personality. It is training your nervous system. Just as physical strength develops through repetition, cognitive restraint develops through consistent practice. At first, silence will feel uncomfortable. Focus will feel demanding. Decisiveness will feel risky. But discomfort signals growth. The more you practice less thinking, less speaking, less distraction, the more control expands. Over time, restraint becomes natural. What once required effort becomes instinct. Strength is not dramatic. It is disciplined, and discipline is built through repetition. Restraint does not always produce immediate reward. In fact, it often feels invisible at first. But what is invisible in the short-term compounds over time. Reputation compounds. The man who speaks selectively and acts deliberately becomes known for steadiness. Others begin to anticipate thoughtfulness rather than volatility. Trust builds slowly, then solidifies. One moment of composure may go unnoticed, but years of composure create a reputation that precedes you. Perception compounds as well. When you consistently demonstrate control, people project depth onto you. Ambiguity becomes gravity. Measured speech becomes authority. Without demanding attention, you begin to command it. Discipline compounds internally. Each moment of restraint strengthens self-trust. Each focused hour increases capacity for the next. Over time, what once required effort becomes character. The contrast is stark. Short-term validation feels rewarding, quick responses, public opinions, immediate recognition. But it fades quickly. Long-term authority grows quietly. It requires patience and consistency. Few men are willing to endure the slow build. Most seek immediate confirmation of strength. But real power rarely announces itself early. Restraint is an investment. And like any investment, its true advantage appears only to those patient enough to let it mature. We return to the beginning. Strength is not noise. It is control. The man who thinks precisely does not drown in options. He evaluates, decides, and moves. His mind is not a battlefield of endless debate but a disciplined instrument. Clarity becomes his advantage. The man who speaks selectively does not compete for attention. He understands that words carry weight only when they are measured. Silence does not threaten him. It serves him. When he speaks, it is intentional. When he remains quiet, it is deliberate. The man who focuses deeply does not surrender his attention to every interruption. He directs it. He chooses what deserves energy and what does not. In a distracted culture, this alone makes him rare. Such a man is difficult to provoke because his emotions are not easily hijacked. Begin with silence. Begin with discipline. Begin with focus. Do not attempt to control the world before you can control your reactions to it. Strength is not loud. It does not demand recognition. It builds quietly through repetition and restraint. Beyond the struggle, where discipline replaces impulse and clarity replaces chaos.